Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. If it's Monday morning and I'm here and Bill's here, then you know what's happening on the podcast daily. It is the game rewatch show. There are no soundboards, but just imagine inside I'm cheering. Bill Landis, as I said, is joining us or joining me. I guess we're joining each other.
Sure.
Whatever. Bill, let's just skip the pleasantries, okay? I'm not in the mood for pleasantries. We're in the middle of the Big Ten season. We're now in the thick of it, and Ohio State's 1-0 in the Big Ten, 52-21, big win over Wisconsin. It was the largest spread against Wisconsin in, I think, 25 years. Ohio State took it and essentially doubled it, and rewatching it, to me, I mean, just big picture, I guess I'm first stunned at how good Ohio State was in the first 20 minutes that allowed them to essentially coast the rest of the game, because I don't feel like, as I rewatched it, it didn't seem as clean in the second half as I would have liked, but it also didn't matter.
I agree with that. Well, first of all, I don't trust that you don't have a soundboard handy. So I'm on my toes. I'm on my toes waiting for that. It did. I mean, it felt like Ohio State was playing a non-conference game against some directional MAC school. Honestly, like in the second half, and those games tend to get a little weird because Ohio State is just up by so much and not really doing much. Like after they got up by so many points, they sort of just like sat in the pistol formation and ran the ball for the rest of the game, and it wasn't anything spectacular. It's fine. Like I guess maybe you want to see them kind of clicking on all cylinders for the entire 40 minutes, but honestly, like they jumped on them so bad, like to a shocking extent that maybe there was a little bit of a lack of focus. But I'm not here to criticize that, because the first 17 minutes of that game were about as good as I've seen Ohio State play.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I know that sometimes in the comments, people are like, oh, why are these guys nitpicking things? Well, number one, that's what we're here to do. Number two, if we don't nitpick and all we do is blow, sunshine and rainbows up people's butts, and we get accused of being a homer, which is fine. I don't mind being a homer. Let's just find a happy medium somewhere and start with just the first takeaway of this game, I guess, which is I thought it was the best called game for an offensive play calling point of view that Ryan Day has had in quite some time, probably since the Clemson game in the Sugar Bowl, where it just seemed like he knew exactly what Jim Leonhard was going to do every step of the way. And it's something I talked about with Austin on the pregame show on Saturday, was that much like Brett Venables at Clemson, Ryan Day's respect for Jim Leonhard is obvious. And I think it kind of forced him to dial it in an extra notch or two this week. And he looked like he had a game plan for every single thing Jim Leonhard wanted to do. And that said, Jim Leonhard did things that he doesn't normally do in an effort to try to counter what he thought Ryan Day was going to do. So the fact that they were that prepared and that far ahead was really like a eye-opening kind of exhalation, I guess, for Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson and the Buckeyes offensive play calling, because I thought at times earlier this year it's been a little bit stagnant.
Ryan Day's really good at sort of taking an L and then kind of bouncing back from that. And I know like he didn't lose to Wisconsin the last time they played him, but when they played in the Big Ten championship at the end of the 2019 season, it felt for at least half that game like Jim Leonhard kind of had Ryan Day's number, and Ohio State had to come back in the second half. I think they're down 21-7. And win that game probably in less convincing fashion than people thought they would. And this is the first time they've played since then. And it is similar, you're right, to Clemson, where they lost in the Sugar Bowl. And like Ryan Day put them up on the board and said the next time we play that team, that's not going to happen again. And it certainly didn't happen again. And I don't know if he viewed Wisconsin quite the same way, but I think there are parallels there. And I've been waiting to see something like this too. I did feel like last week against Toledo, they were building toward something like this, but you can't really be confident in that because it's a MAC opponent. And even if we think Toledo's defense is actually pretty solid, I still think you need to temper expectations coming off of a game like that. But this felt like the next sort of logical step off of a game that looked as good as it looked last week. And everything was just really in sync. And I kind of wrote that on Sunday on Down in the Eyes, OhioState.Rivals.com, that this is – I think if Ryan Day could say, like, this is what I want my perfect offense to look like, I think it looks like what we saw against Wisconsin with the way that the pass game and the run game are kind of married together, the different formations, moving the quarterback. You don't have to run the quarterback, but you can move the quarterback. You mix up the run game a little bit. You can attack every area of the field. And if this continues, then, I think we're talking about probably the best offense that we've seen in the last decade, and probably going back much longer than that at Ohio State, because of everything that they have at their disposal is clicking, and they get Jackson Smith and Jigba back at some point. Like, I don't know how you stop an offense that's working the way that this offense was working and was called against Wisconsin.
Yeah, the only way you stop an offense that's that good is by getting pressure on the quarterback. And as you rewatch this game, I mean, I said it after the game on Saturday night, the offensive line was absolutely dominant in this game. No pass rush. I mean, no pressures, no tackles for loss, no sacks. It's about as clean as you can possibly play. And to your point is that if this offensive line keeps getting better, and I think there was a fair question about what their ceiling was, or what their ceiling is over these first couple weeks, because it seems like they've been good, but I haven't seen them play great. Saturday night, with the exception of a holding penalty on DeJuan Jones on a kick out block, which whatever, every time he puts his hands on someone, it's going to look like he's holding him because his hands are gigantic.
Yeah.
But it's about as good as the offensive line at Ohio State could have played. And, one of the things that I kept going back to watching this game, and maybe it's a bigger picture thing, but there seems to be instant validation for the offseason hires that Ryan Day made, with Justin Fry, with Perry Eliano, with Tim Walton, and Jim Knowles. I just feel like Saturday night was almost a perfect embodiment of all of what the value of each of those guys is. You look at the safeties, the way they've been able to rotate guys in, sitting essentially two guys at a time when they're dealing with injuries. You look at what Tim Walton did to prepare his cornerbacks on very short notice. Ohio State didn't know until really Thursday that Cam Brown and Denzel Burke might not play. And so to be able to turn around and have a true freshman in Jair Brown and J.K. Johnson, a second-year player, making their first start, and they played pretty well. I mean, they weren't perfect, but no cornerback play is ever perfect. And then just Jim Knowles in general, I just think that, and this is something I wrote about for OhioState.Rivals.com on Monday morning in a roundabout way. The growth in Tommy Eichenberg, the growth in Steel Chambers, the growth in Cody Simon, to me is a direct reflection of Jim Knowles coaching the linebackers and Coy McFarland, his linebacker assistant, the job they're doing. Because I don't think Tommy Eichenberg got bigger in the last year. He didn't get faster in the last year. He got smarter in the last year, and he learned how to read things differently and attack things differently. And now we go see a guy who is potentially an All-American linebacker. He's playing certainly like an All-American in the first 4 games of the year. That's not really up for debate. And this is a guy who a year ago people thought couldn't play at Ohio State, and now he might be literally the best linebacker in the country. And I don't know how else you justify that or explain that away other than say Jim Knowles is a really damn good linebacker coach and teaching them things and how to think about defense in a way that they just weren't before.
Tommy sees everything. Like, when you watch Ohio State play week after week, he's the guy that your eye, I think, gets drawn to on the defensive side, even for as well as a guy like Mike Hall has played. And it was good to see him back out there. And I think he made a difference up front for Ohio State against Wisconsin. Like, just Tommy is always around the ball. He's like, he seems to know what every play is going to be. And I think you need to give Tommy credit for that. Like, one, he's a smart kid. He doesn't say a lot, which is what you wrote about. But and I think because he doesn't say a lot, people might not think he's super intelligent, but he is. And that's showing up on tape now. Maybe he was a little slower to pick up on those things last year. I don't know if that's scheme. I don't know if that's being inexperienced, probably some combination of both, but he's clearly seeing the entire field. He sees the big picture. He's either studying, like, unlike anyone studies, to know an offensive tendencies, or Jim Knowles is imparting that wisdom to him. That's probably some combination of the two as well. But it's been a while, I think, since we've seen a linebacker play as instinctually as Tommy has played all season. I don't know. He had 14 tackles against Wisconsin. It felt like maybe he should have felt like closer to 20. Just he was always right there, and made a couple of big stops too on Braelon Allen, who at times looked difficult, I think, for some other guys to bring down. There were quite a few missed tackles that I think are maybe a little alarming with Ohio State still. But Tommy, more often than not, I think gets that guy to the ground, and it's all, it's doubly impressive when it's a guy who's as big as Braelon Allen. He had that one play Um, I think it was in the third quarter where they threw a little swing pass out to Braelon Allen, and Tommy like saw it, was behind him, but like closed really quick, kind of dove at him, got enough of his legs to trip him up and stop Braelon Allen from getting a big gain. And like he was not doing that last year. And Ohio State linebacker has not done that in probably 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's
So
probably since the real quick trigger days of Darren Lee or Jerome
yeah,
Baker where you see that sort of explosive play. And honestly, I wish more super smart people would take Tommy's lead and just shut the up, because sometimes the dumbest thing you can do is talk. And Tommy realizes that he's there to play football and doing a great job. And my first thing in my notes today is just Tommy freaking Eichenberg, because every single play, he's diagnosing it way quicker than anyone else. And I'm just stunned. I mean, and one of the things I talked about with Austin on the pregame show when we did our the keys for the day, the first one was tackle. And I was immediately struck on the first play of the game. Ohio State misses a tackle, or I'm sorry, Braelon Allen goes into a wildcat derp, on the second play of the day for Wisconsin, and Steel Chambers was right there in the backfield and misses the tackle. Sonny Styles gets stiff arm to the ground in the backfield. The Buckeyes had an opportunity to make a lot of lost plays, and a lot of guys weren't doing it, as you said. But Tommy Eichenberg, for some reason, whether it's his hands, whether it's his quickness, whether it's understanding the angles or where to swipe at someone's feet, even if he's not exactly in the right spot, he's at least causing some things to go wrong. And like in basketball, we'd call that like an altered shot. You may not get credit for a block, but you definitely impacted the shooting percentage. And Tommy is impacting the shooting percentage on every single run play that Ohio State's seen in these first 4 weeks. And it's really, really incredible to watch. I mean, really incredible. The other guy who I think, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds with individual players right now, but I thought Teron Vincent in the early part of the game was, again, really, really good. I don't know that he's getting a lot of attention because he's a fifth-year guy, and people just don't like to talk about fifth-year guys that much because you think that they should have splashed and been out of the program and on the way to the NFL by now. But he played really well again. And that combination of Michael Hall and Teron Vincent, I think, may be the best 1-2 punch Ohio State has, because their quickness is so disruptive. And what I'd really like to do, and this may be something more up your alley, go back to chart this game from about the midway point of the third quarter when Ohio State essentially took out all the starting defensive linemen. And I'd like to see how many yards after that Braelon Allen got of his carries, because Wisconsin, to their credit, they were trying to get out of there. The game was over. But Braelon Allen had probably, aside from the 75-yard run, I bet he had 135 yards after the midway point of the third quarter to the end of the game, and he had finished with 165. So,
yeah, I think because I was monitoring that, because one of my bold predictions going into the game was that Wisconsin, I think, would have like 73 rushing yards. I think is the number that I said, and they had 68, I think, in the third quarter, and then they had that it was like a 16 play drive or something. It was like a quintessential Wisconsin scoring drive in the third quarter. But when it happened, I think the defensive line might have been Javante Jean-Baptiste, Tyleik Williams, Duron Cage, and Tyler Friday, that like kind of second/third unit of guys that we've seen out there at times. And Wisconsin just kind of marched down the field on them. And then the long run was when like a bunch of different backups were in. So I would venture to say that Braelon Allen probably had like 50 rushing yards when Ohio State starters were in, without actually counting it up. I had Teron Vincent down in my notes as well, partly because I feel like as much as we've talked about Michael Hall this year and talked about over rotation on the defensive line, I think maybe sometimes that's come off as us sort of maybe implying that we think Teron has not played well. And I don't think that, and maybe we haven't given him enough credit to this point, but I thought that was one of his better games against Wisconsin. I was thinking about past games against Wisconsin, especially going back to like that 2019 season, and how Ohio State back then was sort of, like gumming up Wisconsin's run game. And like BB Landers was a menace against them because he would just shoot into the backfield, knock somebody back, and sort of knock their pullers off track. And if you knock the pullers off track, it knocks the play off timing, and then it just doesn't work. And Teron Vincent did that probably 2 or 3 times on Saturday night. And he's not the one making the tackle. Someone else is cleaning that up, but he's the one who's initiating sort of the play breakdowns when a run like that goes for, 1 or 2 or no yards. So it doesn't really show up on the stat sheet, but I'm glad you pointed him out, because I thought he really stood out in a game when some other guys had some bigger statistical outputs.
Yeah, and when on Thursday night's weekend kickoff show with Bryant Heaton and Killian, we talked about that, and Zach Bourne and Bobby Carpenter both mentioned having a smaller defensive tackle in a game against Wisconsin is probably the way to go, because you want the guy who's a little quicker and can get skinny and get through the hole. And I just think, I think kudos to Paul Chryst in Wisconsin for putting that salt away type drive when you're down by 45 points. That's brilliant. I think to just go out there and put that 16 play, really imposing your will type of drive to end the game was brilliant. And I'm glad it happened, because my God, that game took a long time. And if they, weren't running the ball a bunch of times on that drive, imagine how much later we would have been there on Saturday.
Yeah.
Maybe I could have avoided hitting a deer on my way home if I would have been in the stadium 5 minutes longer. So maybe this wasn't actually a great thing. Whatever.
We're just glad you made it out of it okay, so we can do the rewatch.
Whatever. Are there let's talk first half, because there's a handful of plays I think that were sort of the moments where you're like, oh boy, that's really special. The first crossing route, the deep crosser to Emeka Egbuka. We talked about CJ Stroud a week ago and the ability to put the ball exactly where it needs to be. And this is probably a Wisconsin issue. I think Jim Leonhard, if he had to go back, would find things that he needs to really correct. It's the depth that the Wisconsin linebackers were getting. Yeah. When you play a quarterback as good as CJ Stroud, you better be back a little bit further, because you're wanting him to beat you up front and make sure he's staying in that 10-yard range. But the first drive of the game, the touch pass over the top to Emeka Egbuka was unbelievable in its placement. And it was one of the moments for the night, and I guess I'm jumping all over the place here, but one of the things about Ohio State that I really noticed on Saturday, because I don't think it was CJ Stroud's best game, and I don't think he'll tell Austin that he's dumb for suggesting it, but especially in the third quarter, second quarter, and then with the exception of like one drive in the third quarter, I thought he was a little off on Saturday night. Only 4 receivers had catches for Ohio State, but what I noticed is that these guys were taking the ball and going. There's no stopping. Even if the ball wasn't in the perfect spot, and again, I'm sorry for jumping around, but I'm tired. The last touchdown of the night, the one to Emeka Egbuka that was just an absolute dart that he threw, was actually kind of behind Egbuka as opposed to leading him into the slant. But for a receiver to catch that ball, thrown as hard as it was, thrown as quick as it was, to adjust and turn and catch a ball behind him, but not slow down and run straight through the catch and just zip to the end zone. I think that there's a skill level, and we talk about Brian Hartline all the time, Bill, like how good he is, but there's a skill level that these receivers have and that they're being taught that I don't think other people are really getting. And you see it in a guy like Egbuka making plays like that, because he catches it and goes, and it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I don't know if that's, I guess that's just bank repetitions with the, like, I don't know. I think that's really hard to do. And Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson did that too, where it was Justin Fields and with CJ Stroud, where, neither one of them on either end of that connection needed to be perfect, but they just sort of always bailed each other out at the times when it wasn't for whatever reason. And it is special. It's a little uncanny. Like I would love to like pick Brian Hartline's brain on how you coach that, but something tells me that might just be something that's innate in these guys that he brings into the program. But that play, I didn't notice it. I was down on the field when that touchdown happened, and I didn't notice it watching it when I was down there. But watching it on the rewatch, I realized just how far behind Emeka that ball was. It seemed like they were trying to get that too. I think they were frustrated with kind of the stop and start nature of the offense once they got up 28-0, which is understandable. And I think CJ especially, there were times throughout the game where he just looked kind of bored. Like, I don't know. I think he only had like 15 pass attempts or something like that in the first half, which is a low number for him. They were running the ball well. And even he said post game, like in a game like that, where maybe it's not about throwing it all over the yard. I know he had 5 touchdown passes, but they weren't slicing and dicing him and throwing the ball on every play. He said something about trying to stay more engaged. And I guess like when his numbers called, making sure maybe he's a little sharper than he was throw to throw on Saturday night. But he was still very good. He was a little high for sure on a couple of throws, but some of the balls
his
needed
passes
to be high.
were a little high.
His passes were a little high. Thank you very much. Yeah. But some of them needed to be, like even the crosser to Emeka that you started off this conversation with, that ball needed to be as high as it was. And I don't know, that's part of what makes CJ special, because I don't know how many people would see that linebacker sitting there, even if he is sitting too shallow, and still try to throw it over him. because that's a really difficult throw to make. And CJ makes it look easy, but it's incredibly difficult, I think, for a college quarterback to see that, to trust it, and then put the right amount of touch on it to get it over him while hitting his receiver in stride so that he can keep running after he catches it. And CJ probably does that better than anybody in the country.
Yeah. I don't want people to think that we're being critical of a guy who threw 5 touchdowns and 300 yards and has been as good as he is. But I think that there is, in some ways, and sometimes perhaps we take for granted how good he is, because if you think about the first interception of the day, or the interception that Graham Mertz threw on the second drive of the game, like, that's just not a throw that CJ Stroud would ever make. It was just a poorly thrown ball, and it leads to essentially the game ending right there, because Wisconsin was leaning on the Ohio State offensive line even a little bit early in that, or defensive line in that drive. They had found a little bit of a rhythm, and that play, the receiver's open. And the fact is, the Graham Mertz doesn't make the throw. And so I just think it's crazy, because we can almost pick individual plays through the entire season of CJ Stroud being off, and other quarterbacks, this happens a lot and regularly in games. And so it's just, when CJ is not at his absolute best, I think it looks obvious, because he's generally so good. And when he looks even close to mortal for a quarter, you're all of a sudden going, wow, what's wrong with CJ Stroud? Is he high in throwing the ball? Are his passes high? Did you see a second quarter, or did you hear Luke Whippler screaming on the field after one of the running plays? What the hell was that?
That was, I don't know. That sounded like he was in an incredible amount of pain, but he popped right back up. I don't know what happened to him. I watched the play over a couple times to try to see, like, if he got rolled up on or something. It didn't look like it. But yeah, that scream, that was like a blood curdling scream almost.
And then he just popped right back up, and they zeroed in on his face on TV, and he's like, like, you could tell it. But man, some of these dudes are really tough, because if you're screaming loud enough that an entire stadium of people can hear you, when there's 105,000 people and all of them making a lot of noise, and you can hear it on TV, that must have been a moment of some intense pain. And then to just stand up and be like, okay, I'm fine, let's go again. Like, I couldn't do that, Bill. I wouldn't want to do that.
That was, I thought, one of his better games, Luke Whippler. The entire offensive line played great, as you said earlier. But Luke in particular, I thought, was really good, getting up to the second level. And he had a tough job sometimes too, because like, Keanu Benton is a big dude, and and I don't know, what's Keanu Benton, like 320 pounds.
He looked like about 6'6" and 320. I mean, that's a guy that dwarfs Luke Whippler at 6'3", 305.
Yeah, and he was lined up kind of head up over Luke on a couple of those run plays, and to Luke's credit, like, I don't recall many instances of Luke getting knocked back, and he had some good help with combos on the inside, but there were a few where it was a solo block, and Luke held his own, and I think when they can get Luke up to the second level and kind of get him off of some of those defensive linemen that oftentimes do have such a physical advantage over him, because he's a little bit undersized for an offensive lineman, and get him up on a linebacker where that matchup's a little more favorable for Luke, that's when the running game really takes off, in my opinion. And that happened, I want to say, like, just about every time they ran the ball, especially in the first half, and probably for most of the third quarter too. It wasn't even that they didn't have any tackles for loss. It was like guys were hardly ever getting touched until they were 2, 3, 4 yards down the field. And when that happens with Ohio State, you're going to see the kind of game where two guys go for 100 rushing yards, and it doesn't look like it was particularly difficult to get them there.
No, I was actually just going to talk about the running backs. And I know one of the questions we've seen on Twitter a few times on Sunday was Mayan Williams hurt now? Is Ryan Day trying to cater to Travion Henderson's ego by making sure he had 21 carries and Mayan Williams only had 11? Like, no. This is the beauty of having two really good running backs. You don't need to get them both beat up every single week. And Mayan Williams, I'm not going to speak for anyone else. He had a very emotional week. He had a funeral for his grandmother. Travion Henderson, coming back off of only 4 carries a week before, probably needs to get a little bit more into the flow of the offense. The game was over. Like, just let Trey get out there and knock off some of his rust, because both of them are running super hard. There's going to be a lot of physical moments coming up, and I think you got to save as many hits on these guys as possible. I think Ohio State should have got Trey out of there with about 14 carries as opposed to the 21 that he had, and let down Hayden get back in there in the middle of the third quarter. But generally speaking, anybody who has concerns about the two-back system and whether or not it can be effective, much like people who had concerns about whether or not Jim Knowles' 4-2-5 defense can be effective against the run, like it seems like both of those got answered pretty well on Saturday night. And Ohio State's ability to control both sides of the line of scrimmage was just the difference in this game.
It definitely was. I was a little surprised at just like how ineffective Wisconsin's run game was. I think part of that's a Wisconsin issue. I don't say that to take anything away from Ohio State's defense, because as I've said before, they can only play who the schedule makers put in front of them, and to this point they've played those teams and played against them well. So I give them credit for that. But something I think was a little off with Wisconsin too. That didn't seem like a particularly inspired game plan on the offensive side of the ball for them. And Ohio State kind of owned them up front until the point that the game was over. And then Wisconsin started getting a little pushback, but it was much too late in the game to change anything by that point. But I thought the offensive line for Ohio State for sure dominated that game as much as I've seen them dominate a somewhat quality opponent probably over the last couple of years. We've talked a lot about Jim Knowles. We've talked a fair amount about Perry Eliano. Maybe not so much about Tim Walton, but I feel like we've not talked enough about Justin Fry and the impact that he's had on the offensive line room. And maybe people like myself are wondering, what's he going to change schematically? And some of it has changed, like here and there a little bit, nothing major, but they're blocking better. There's a different mentality with that group. I think they're technically better, and they're moving people way more than they were last year. And the players get credit for that too. But I think, Justin Fry, I would say Justin Fry, and I say this, I guess, from a point of ignorance, because I don't watch every single college football game, but I can't imagine there are 5 more impactful offseason assistant coaching hires this year than Justin Fry right now.
Yeah. And one of them obviously is probably on the Ohio State coaching staff with him and Jim Knowles. But you're right. I mean, when you look at what they're doing up front, it just seems like a different attitude. Maybe it's because these guys are in the right positions. Maybe it's because they're playing, interior offensive linemen on the interior of the offensive line. I was thinking about it during the game and thinking about it again during the rewatch. Like, we don't hear Matthew Jones's name ever. And that's what you want, I guess, from a guard. You do not hear his name. Donovan Jackson a couple times on pulling type plays, he was just right where he needed to be. He doesn't always knocking guys off their butts, but like he's in the way, and that's really what being an offensive lineman is about. It's about making sure the running backs have a lane, and he's been super over these first couple weeks. And Matt Jones both. I mean, I think those two have been as good as possible, and you certainly see the growth of the offensive line. One area that I think that we haven't talked much about it, and you mentioned, is Tim Walton, because we don't really know what to expect or what to make of the Ohio State cornerback room, because A, there's only 6 guys on scholarship. B, right now there's only 3 of them that are healthy enough to play. And you don't know exactly what's going on with Denzel Burke from a year ago. He looks objectively worse than he did a year ago. So you start to wonder, hey, is this a Tim Walton issue? But I don't think it is. I think that we saw, as I said earlier in the show, like an opportunity for him this week to really showcase his impact on the defense, and to get these guys ready. And Jair Brown and J.K. Johnson in 2 days' notice was impressive. I thought Jair Brown is a guy that in the recruiting world, in the process, was sort of overlooked. He was the first commitment in the class of 2022, and people sort of like, ho-hum, he's okay. But he brings a different attitude, and this is what I actually really like about him and J.K. Johnson out there together, is that those two are ferocious, and those two are going to get in your face, and they're going to be physical. And they don't really care if they get called for a pass interference or a holding, because I don't care. You didn't catch the ball. All they care about is guys not catching the football. And to their credit, there wasn't much of that for Wisconsin on Saturday night.
There was not. I would like to see like even more of when those young guys are out there. I would like to see Jim Knowles give them even more man coverage responsibility maybe than he was giving them on Saturday. The handful of times, and it's less than a handful, it was like 2 or 3, where I thought to myself, like, well, that looks like a freshman, or that looks like an inexperienced guy out there, where when they were playing zone, and J.K. Johnson in particular maybe just like didn't get enough depth or wasn't or didn't seem super aware of like the route distribution. And like that one at the end of the first half, when it was basically a Hail Mary and Tanner McAllister had to make a hero play, like that probably shouldn't have happened. But if you watch the play, like J.K. Johnson's playing pretty shallow, and it looked like he was expecting something to come his way in the flats. And it's just like, in that situation, I don't think you should be expecting that. But I do think he's largely played very well. And that's good for Ohio State now and in the long term. And I like Jair Brown a whole lot. Just really physical. He seems like at the catch point, not afraid of anybody. Both those guys have similar mentalities, and honestly, probably mentalities that at least Denzel Burke maybe could benefit from, maybe trying to pick up on a little bit, in terms of embracing the physicality of the cornerback position, which I think is lacking sometimes when he's out there.
Yeah, I don't want to keep picking on Denzel Burke. I know he's had a rough few weeks, and it's certainly not just here. It's been all over the Ohio State media world. I mean, but again, when it looks like one player isn't playing at the level everyone else is, you what else are you supposed to talk about at that spot? But Tanner McAllister, I mean, you brought him up. He played probably his best game of his Ohio State career so far. That specific play you're talking about at the end of the first half, it's one of those degree of difficulty plays that I don't think you really get on first watch, because he was covering his guy and then saw the ball be thrown and just on a dead sprint was able to completely switch his mindset. It's like playing Madden, and I like to bring up Madden on the show if EA Sports wants to sponsor the podcast in some way. It's like he pushed circle and switched his guy real quick and was like, oh, now I'm covering this guy. So really awesome to see him out there and healthy and playing again. When you watch Tanner McAllister and Josh Proctor, who both played pretty sticking well on Saturday night, neither one of them played a week ago and just got to take some rest. This week, it's Lathan Ransom and Cam Martinez who got to take a rest, and that opened up the door for Sonny Styles to play early and often. Kind of a mixed bag for Sonny in his first real extended playing time at Ohio State. This is a moment of the show where we're going to talk about things not we saw on the rewatch, but things I saw on the field, because the moment that Sonny Styles decided to absolutely waylay a helpless punt return team member for Wisconsin, when he got over to the sideline, the verbiage that Ryan Day used in discussing the play with him was not PG or PG-13, and twice involved a word that if you were to spell it on the internet, you'd need to put a bunch of symbols into. And that play right there was, Ryan Day talked about how he should have just taken 3 knees and ran off to the booze, because that drive wouldn't have gone the way it did if they would have started the ball at the 20-yard line instead of at the 10. And I thought that, again, Sonny, kind of a mixed bag. He had to play early where he was, but he's showing what he can do. He was in the right spot a lot of times, but the ability to finish a play and the ability to be where a play is happening is what separates a freshman from a starter at Ohio State.
I like the idea of playing Sonny as a bigger nickelback. I thought maybe that'd be a Court Williams kind of role, and it wasn't, at least for that night. It was
because
funny.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I think the clear difference is that Sonny Styles has the length and the ability to cover receivers, and I don't think that Court Williams does. So as we talked about last week, also this is where, were I being really creative in the editing process of these shows, when you said he has the chance to be a bigger nickelback, I would have hit the sound button and said, look at this photograph, and it would have been a picture of Sonny Styles. But anyway, go ahead.
I thought there was like a 4% chance you were going to be ready to do that anyway. It was funny to me. Like I thought the bigger personnel on defense was interesting when they put a third linebacker out there and put Sonny out there as the big nickel. And then after that special teams penalty happened, they didn't put Sonny out there anymore. He went out there at the end when it was like the twos and they had to put the backup safeties in. But there were moments after that where they were still playing the 3 linebacker look, but just kept Tanner McAllister out there instead of Sonny Styles. So I'm wondering if that was them sending a bit of a point. Like, you don't get to play meaningful reps if you make those kind of mistakes on special teams, which I think is probably good accountability on the part of Ryan Day. But I agree with you. I thought it was definitely a mixed bag. But even the play where he got into the backfield and missed that tackle, he still strung that play out wide and put the ball carrier in a place where he had nowhere else to go in. And I think it was Tommy Eichenberg, of course it was, who cleaned it up. So that's still a good play, I think, from Sonny, even if he's not the one who made the tackle.
This is another segment of the Monday Rewatch show that we're going to play. It's called Who is Cade Stover Trying to Fight This Week? And this week it was Herbig, the linebacker from Wisconsin, who came into the game as sort of the most acclaimed player for the Badgers on defense. he's an outside linebacker. Cade Stover is a tight end. They were running into each other a lot. There was a lot of collisions between those two. It's like the videos of two mountain goats who like just bang heads into each other. But this specifically kept occurring on extra points, and every single time Herbig would just run into him and put his hands to Cade's face and got called for it one time and just kept doing it over and over and over again. And every single time it was like a cartoon where the protagonist was getting really angry and like the red meter kept going up and it got to the point, the final one. And I don't know if you can see this on TV or not, but again, this is what we see on the field. It's always fun. He hit Stover in the face, and Cade took a deep breath and went and like was this close to unload and had to like pull himself back. It was like a ghost of 1,000 of Cade Stover's forefathers like held him back, like, don't swing on this man. So I said it over every week. I know I'm a broken record, like Austin talking about defensive line rotation, but like the opportunities that Cade Stover is getting on the offense is a direct result of the fact that he is bringing something to this team that they have not had. And that is a defensive mentality on offense where this dude is so aggressive, and it is super fun to watch, and to see that now translating into opportunities down the field and the ability to extend plays, and plus he's got really soft hands, so clearly doing a good job catching the ball. Like, this isn't a kid who's catching the ball against his body and looking awkward. Like, he's out there looking athletic. But we can go back to your first point about the offense. Cade Stover is what changes this offense the most, in my opinion.
The tight end position in general has been more important to the offensive success than I was envisioning coming into the year, and much of that is to do with Cade. Like, I never in a million years would I expect him to be as good as he's been. Like, if you said, what do you think Cade Stover is going to be coming into this year if he's a starting tight end, I would say, like, I don't know, like a try hard guy who might block pretty well, but otherwise we won't know much about him. And that is, if I were to say that now, that would be selling him immensely short. Like, he is that. He plays his butt off, and he blocks really well, but he's way more polished as a receiver than I thought he could be. His hands are way stronger than I thought they would be. It just looks very natural to him. And those plays when they ran like those tight end delays and leaked him out on the backside of the play, those don't work unless you as Cade Stover, the player, like really sells those blocks to begin with and then kind of sneaks out. Like, and it just looked like he's been doing it for 10 years. And I know, like, he's played tight end very little up until this point, but he already looks like he's a pro at it. So
he's going to be a Dan Campbell NFL head coach in 20 years.
Yeah.
Some guy we're just like, I don't know why this guy made an NFL roster and stayed on one for 15 years, but now he did. And now he wants to kick everyone's butt, man. He's just awesome to watch. And I think the best thing about what Cade's doing, and you can see this on TV, you can see it in the locker room, you can see it at practice, his way is rubbing off on G. Scott. It's rubbing off on Joe Royer. That is where his impact is going to be the longest. And I don't know if Cade Stover, it's crazy to talk about it, that Cade Stover is a guy who probably could declare for the NFL after this year.
I was thinking that during the game. I was like, is he going to be here next year?
And now you start to wonder, like, how does he impact guys? And that's that ability to change the culture of the room is super important. And he's doing it. I wanted to talk one more thing. I mean, we're pushing 40 minutes here, which is fine. I can talk all day. I can do this all day. But Travion Henderson, if I had to nitpick something about him, Bill, and I don't have to, but I'm going to, I think he needs to find a way to get hit less hard more often. I don't know what it is about what he's doing, but it seems like he gets hit harder than Mayan Williams does, and I don't know why that happens.
Part of playing running back well is protecting yourself, I think. And I don't know if that's squaring yourself up before you get hit or what. Like, I don't. Maybe we can ask Tony Alford about that at some point. But I feel the same way when I watch him. Sometimes I watch Trey run, and I wonder if there's so much discussion about running tough and being a physical player that he overdoes it sometimes, and then ends up putting himself in a position where he's going to get himself hurt. And he's been banged up, I think is probably the right way to put it, for the majority of his career to this point. When he's
And
healthy,
to his credit, though, he's not missing games. I mean, he's
no,
out
no,
there,
no.
he's tough.
But
But
it just seems like he's limiting himself a little bit when he's banged
yeah,
up, right?
I watch Mayan Williams, who's delivering a lot of punishment, same as Trey. But when he's not in a play where he's actively delivering the hit, Mayan has an ability to like slink out of the way or get himself just so that the hit is grazing. J.K. Dobbins is great at this too. He was so small, but he never seemed to get hit square. And I don't know if it's just a matter of vision. I don't know if it's a matter of what you said, and he's saying, I'm going to be tough and I'm going to take the hit and I'm going to deliver the hit. But as you said, sometimes the best thing a running back can do is like not get hit. So it's just something that I noticed more in watching this game than I did previous games. And I wonder long-term sake for Trey, like how do you fix that? How do you get better? I don't know if it's like a fixed thing, but I think it's something you can get better at. You can get better at avoiding being lined up and teed off on.
I think you can too, and I think like he's only a sophomore, like he's 4 games into his sophomore year. So I think when we talk about these guys, sometimes we forget that how young they are. Like he's got another, basically almost 2 full seasons of development left, but before he goes off to the NFL, so he's got time to work on that. But it is something that I noticed too, and actually Austin and I were talking about that in the press box on Saturday night too. It's just like, man, like sometimes he gets hit really hard, and it seems like it could be avoidable if he did something a little different.
And I wonder if that's because in high school, nobody ever tackled him.
Yeah, maybe.
Like
he didn't have to work on that because no one was near him. Yeah.
Right. Like Mayan Williams was playing in Ohio and playing at Winton Woods and ran for 6,000 yards in high school. It's not like he was unproductive, but he clearly was in probably a more competitive area where he was getting hit most weeks. Travion Henderson would run the ball 7-8 times a game in high school for 300 yards and be done. So, I don't know. It's just these little things that we're talking about, and we're just thinking about it as it's happening. This is natural, free-flowing conversation, baby. We're not here with any sort of script. Here's another thought I had. I want to circle back to the Cade Stover point you just brought up. If Jackson Smith-Njigba doesn't get hurt on the first play of the season, is Cade Stover getting targeted like this?
Probably not. No. I think they needed someone else to emerge as a maybe initially
Security.
It was like a safety valve for CJ, but now in short order, Cade's become more than that. I think he's shown that he can be more than that, but I don't know if that happens. And it was kind of like Kevin Wilson said, like Jeremy Ruckert didn't get the ball last year because he just didn't demand it in the way that Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson did, and like Jackson clearly would be demanding the ball if he was out there, and maybe Marvin and Emeka, who I think are demanding it now, weren't necessarily that way from the jump, and that created an opening for Cade to show that he can be a reliable guy in the passing game. But I don't think Cade is what he is now, and I don't think the position is as valuable as it's been for the offense if Jackson was not, taken out of the game basically in the first quarter against Notre Dame.
Yeah, and Kevin Wilson also said that Jeremy Ruckert didn't earn the opportunity to be that active in the offensive play calling in the passing game a year ago. And again, talking about Cade Stover, he clearly has. Not a lot of freshmen flashing. We've already talked about Sonny Styles. Down Hayden ran well again. Other than that, is there anything else from this game, Bill, on second watch for you that stood out or that you're like, man, we want to talk about this?
I thought it was, and maybe we talked about this last week because he scored a couple times, but I thought we got a nice sort of view. We got a wider view, I think, of the skill set of Julian Fleming. The touchdown that he scored when he ran through 3 defenders is one thing. I think we kind of knew that he had that in him. But when he juked the defender out of his shoes and ran for 31 yards, I wasn't so sure that he had that in him. He had a nice block.
I'm not sure that he did have that in him. I think he just slipped and the guy slipped with him.
But just kind of looked cool.
But I
thought it was a good game for Julian.
He's, we talked about this back in August. Like, he didn't look fluid moving around at practice even in August. The way that he is moving in and out of his breaks, the way he's moving without the ball, the way he's moving with the ball, like he looks healthy for the first time in his career. And that touchdown that he had on Saturday night, that sort of toughness, you cannot teach. He catches a ball on a slant and runs dead on into a pair of linebackers and they fall down and he doesn't. That's a difference that a lot of receivers can't make. And I think that it's really just encouraging to see. And you hope that he continues to build off of it and stay healthy, because he's really got a physical skill set that no one else on this team has, the combination of size and speed. Should we talk about shoes? Should we talk about Marvin's shoes?
I guess, yeah. The ESPN certainly wants us to talk about them with how much they were showing them during the broadcast. I don't know. I'm not a fashionista, so I don't know if I guess they were cool. I don't know. I don't know if I would have done it.
I don't know that I would have done it. I don't think Ohio State really wanted him to do it, considering that he obviously changed shoes at halftime. And it's not like they were made by Louis Vuitton, so they were uncomfortable. They were the same type of shoes he always wears, but clearly there was some distraction about the shoes at that point. I don't think the Apple Watch matters. Whatever, you can use that for a number of reasons, and those bands aren't hard to, it's not like you're going to hurt yourself with those on. But it was interesting. Maybe means nothing, maybe means something, that his worst game of the season was one where he was maybe focused on other stuff. I'm just saying. I'm just saying, like, you don't know. We live in a different world of college football right now. There's a lot of distractions and a lot of things that can maybe cause maybe not to be on your game, right?
Yeah, I guess your mind can be elsewhere. I think clearly a lot of thought went into that ensemble. And maybe you'd like the focus to be more on what's going to happen on the field. He had a couple nice plays for sure, but yeah,
I bet he has a huge game against Rutgers. That's all I'm saying. Like I imagine he gets the message loud and clear,
and probably wears normal shoes.
Yeah. Last thought I have, two more. I got two more thoughts, because folks, I want to be clear about something, America. When I say I rewatched the game, I really do rewatch the game. I rewatch the commercials. I rewatch everything, because I want to experience it like, I want to experience it like they experienced it.
Oh,
you know what I mean? With a beer at 6:30 in the morning. Two things. Number one area where Ohio State's secondary depth, I think, really impacted them on Saturday night against Wisconsin was not on defense. I think it was on special teams and on the kick return coverage. Ohio State was a little bit leaky in that area of the game on Saturday. That's not somewhere they've traditionally been bad or struggling. It was noticeably different to me when you don't have some of your main guys out there, guys like Lathan Ransom, who are aces on special teams. And that was one area where I think that you're like, that didn't look right. But that's probably why. Like, special teams is where the depth really shows. And when you have to take away key pieces of that, because guys like J.K. Johnson have to play defense every rep, things change. Second, in the transfer portal era, what stops a program? Let's say one of the three best programs in the country plays against a player who plays a position like running back, and he's super good. And you're like, man, if only we would have recruited that guy just a little bit harder out of high school, because even though that player may be from the state of the team we just played against, maybe in high school he really wanted an offer from us, one of the top three programs in the country, but we didn't really go after him because we weren't sure if he was a linebacker or a running back, hypothetically. What stops you from then saying, after this player has, let's say, 2 great seasons and being a big time All-American type Doak Walker candidate at running back, what stops you from going, hey, you know what, next year we need a second running back who wants to split some carries with Travion Henderson? Maybe. Do you think that that's part of football now?
I think
hypothetically,
there's some scouting that goes on for sure when these games happen, and I don't mean opponent scouting for tendencies. I mean, I wonder if that guy can fit on our roster someday. So,
like when you're watching Logan Brown, the left tackle for Wisconsin on Wednesday night or Saturday night, Wednesday night, where the hell am I? When you're watching Logan Brown, a former 5-star player from Michigan who chose Wisconsin, making his first career start, goes out there, acquitted himself fairly well against Ohio State. You know damn well you need offensive tackles in Columbus next year. Like, do you not immediately start penciling down names of players around the country? Like, okay, maybe we should find a way to not tamper with this guy. I mean, like, how do you handle this from now on? It just seems like the world is so different.
I think especially too when, like, Wisconsin's offense is, in my opinion, trending in a particularly bad direction, but there are good individual players on that offense. It feels similar to me like when, and maybe this, I don't think this was happening at the time, but like when Ohio State got Jonah Jackson from Rutgers, it's like they had one good offensive player. His name was Jonah Jackson, and then Ohio State got him. Yeah, I think that absolutely happens. It will continue to happen from here on out. Actually, this is similar, but, and I don't say this as a means of spooking Ohio State fans, but when I was on the field after the game, kind of navigating through all the players leaving the field, Paul Chris like walked by me at a pretty brisk pace and went right to Carson Hinsman and shook his hand. Carson Hinsman, who is from Wisconsin and probably any other year would have gone to Wisconsin. So, yeah, I think that happens. I think all that's intentional.
It's fun. College football's fun. And it's only going to get funner because the rules don't exist anymore. That's great. And what's also great is spending my Monday mornings talking to Bill Landis as we break down the rewatch of Ohio State and Wisconsin. This week, it was a 52-21 win over the Badgers. The Buckeyes are 1-0 in the Big Ten. They have Rutgers coming up. We're going to be at Roosters on Monday. We've got potentially some basketball stuff coming on the podcast. We got all week long content like you've come to expect over these last 2 months. We appreciate you constantly sticking with us at the podcast. We're always working on getting better and being more consistent in our delivery. So thank you for your patience, your feedback, and your patronage. That's Bill. I'm Berm. We'll talk to you later.